कृष्णमूर्ती विचारतात, We have never been able to solve the problem of suffering, sorrow, pain, and so on. This question of human suffering, not any particular human being's suffering, but the suffering of the whole of the humanity. The suffering is common to everybody. The suffering as suffering, it is not your or mine, but that suffering is the millions and millions of the people in the world. All human beings are suffering at this very moment because of war, starvation, brutality, violence, and so on. There is also suffering of not knowing of oneself. Can all suffering, all sorrow, all pain can come to an end, not ending up our particular sorrow, suffering, pain, but all humans being. कृष्णमूर्ती इथे फारच महत्वाचे आपल्याला विचारतात, आपण या अगोदर असा कधीच विचार केला नाही. Can that suffering in you as a human being come to an end? Can it come to an end in you because your consciousness is the consciousness of the world? Your consciousness is not your consciousness, but shared by all humanity. So your consciousness is the consciousness of every other human being. Content of consciousness is consciousness. Content means anger, greed, envy, violence, a search for certainty, pain of loneliness, sorrow of nearest relative's death. All these things are the content. And as a content, all are one and only one. निसर्गदत्त महाराज म्हणतात की चपाती, रवा, सोजी, ब्रेड काही म्हटलं तरी त्यात मूळ स्वरूपात गहू हे आहेच. तसंच अँगर, ग्रीड इत्यादी वेगळे वाटले तरी ते कंटेंट म्हणून कंटेंटच आहेत. असो, यू मे हॅव ए डिफरंट पेरिफेरल, डिफरंट बिहेवियर, but basically, deeply, your consciousness is the consciousness of every other human being in the world, at any time, at any corner of the world. Suffering, pleasure, fear, ambition, hope, anger, loneliness, greed, search for certainty, search for safety, all that are the content, and all that content is you as your consciousness. Content are you. You are fear. You are greed. You and your fear are not two different things. You and your greed are not two different things. You are that. आणि कृष्णमूर्ती म्हणतात, इथेच थांबा. Remain with this fact. Don't do anything. So we are the world, but psychologically, because our consciousness is shared by all humanity or by all human beings. हे विश्वची माझे घर किंवा वृक्षी, वल्ली, वनचरी इत्यादी चा याच्याशी काही संबंध नाही. काही लोक तसा संबंध लावतात. असो, so you are the world psychologically, and if you are completely free from fear, greed, anger, envy that affect the consciousness of the world. हे कृष्णमूर्तीचे म्हणणे अतिशय नवीन आणि क्रांतिकारक आहे. That affect the consciousness of the world. कृष्णमूर्तींनी एका ठिकाणी म्हटले आहे की स्टॅलिन, हिटलर आणि जीसस येशू ख्रिस्त अशा एकाच माणसाच्या मनोवृत्तीचा इतर मानवी समूहावर चांगलाच परिणाम झाला होता. असो, कृष्णमूर्ती अत्यंत कळकळीने सांगतात की डू यू अंडरस्टँड हाऊ एक्स्ट्राऑर्डिनरी इम्पॉर्टंट दिस थिंग? इफ we as human beings change fundamentally, and that change will affect the consciousness of every other human being is called radical change. Similarly, when you realize that sorrow, suffering, pain, loneliness and so on is common thing for every human being in the world, that means we all suffer, then that realization makes you free from your own suffering, sorrow, pain and so on. And instead of your own sorrow, pain and so on, there is a compassion, and that is really the beginning of the compassion. And this is the radical and the fundamental change in our consciousness, असे कृष्णमूर्ती म्हणतात. आणि सर्वात महत्वाची गोष्ट म्हणजे when there is such freedom from suffering, sorrow, pain, loneliness and so on, तरी पण हे असतातच, पण त्यांच्याकडे आता दुर्लक्ष असते. त्याची तीक्ष्णता अगदी नगण्य झाली आहे. त्याची जागा आता करुणेने घेतली आहे व करुणेचे पात्र आता जड झाले आहे. When there is such freedom from sorrow and so on, there is compassion, and that compassion is not before or after the ending of individual sorrow and so on, but in the very moment of individual sorrow, suffering and pain, and in this state there is no individual sorrow, individual suffering, individual pain, etc. So to understand what it means to live with compassion, you must understand what suffering is. कृष्णमूर्ती म्हणतात की आपण इतके क्रूर आहोत की मुक्या निष्पाप बिचाऱ्या पशुपक्ष्यांना सुद्धा पेन आणि सफरिंगच्या जाळ्यात आपण अडकवले आहे. कृष्णमूर्तीचे ते शब्द असे आहेत. वी ब्रिंग सफरिंग टू एनिमल्स ऑल्सो, वी किल देम, वी ईट देम, वी हॅव डिस्ट्रॉइड स्पेसीज ऑफ प्लेसेस because our love is also fragmented. We love so-called God, and in the name of God we kill the human beings. कृष्णमूर्ती म्हणतात की when you suffer psychologically or physically, remain with that suffering or pain completely without single moment of thought, then suffering brings compassion. Compassion is not emotion or something romantic, not also a social work or not charity and so on. There is enormous suffering of mankind due to wars. We are all like the rest of the world. Psychologically, you may have a different color and so on, but inwardly, psychologically, we are the rest of mankind. We all suffer. We all go through agony, fear, uncertainties, confusion, trapped in absurd religious nonsense. Trapped in absurd religious nonsense. We are all that. Can we see all that not as idea but as a fact, as burning actual daily fact, then out of that perception the responsibility of compassion comes. Compassion is intelligence. That intelligence it not depend on knowledge. One may have read a great deal, write many books and delivered many lectures and also capable of great arguments, but that problem solving mind is not an intelligent mind. Compassion is global action, not any kind of individual action for any particular person. कृष्णमूर्ती म्हणतात की if you have no such passion or that kind, you cannot be creative. When there is no egocentric activity, there is a compassion. When there is no ego, that is the highest expression of compassion. कृष्णमूर्ती विचारतात, हाऊ कॅन वन बिकम compassionate when one says I am Hindu, I am Muslim, follow any guru, believe in something, believe in any scripture? When we attach to a conclusion, we cannot have a compassion. Strongly believe on anything that is the obstacle in the coming of compassion. Charity and social work is not a compassion. Compassion is not yours or mine. Where there is intelligence, there is no me. You, as a human being, are world psychologically. This is not an idea. It is actuality. It is so. Your consciousness is the consciousness of mankind. If that is truth for you, not an idea, then what takes place? Has one lived as individual, fighting, struggling as a limited, narrow individual? Of course not. So, it is very important to see the truth that you are the rest of mankind. We have accepted all this as a part of our life, but when we does not accept this, we runs away from it through every form of entertainment, including religious entertainment. So you are not only your particular little sorrow, you are the sorrow of mankind. If you see that your sorrow is not only yours, it is the sorrow of the whole of mankind. So you don't try, does not shed tears about your pain, about your suffering, your little failures, and so on. But when you realize that you are the representative of all mankind, all humanity, it brings about an enormous sense of vitality and energy. But when you individualize this sorrow and pain and so on, then that vast energy is limited in the small little channel and becomes the dirty. Now, is it possible to end sorrow? If there is an ending of sorrow, suffering, and so on in one human being, that ending affects the whole consciousness of mankind, that brings an action in the totality of the mankind. कृष्णमूर्तींनी स्टॅलिन, हिटलर, येशू ख्रिस्त या एकाच माणसाच्या विचारांचा परिणाम कसा होतो याचा उल्लेख आपण सुरुवातीला केला आहेच. मोस्ट ऑफ अस some kind of sorrow and sorrow of not reaching the other side of the river or sorrow of the never becoming intelligent as somebody like J.K. also. If somebody died whom you love terribly, you are left completely and suddenly alone and isolated because you are so attached. But when that person goes, you suddenly discover how empty you are. You shed tears of self-pity, shed tears of loss, shed tears of loneliness, which you call sorrow. Can that sorrow end? That does not mean you became indifferent. Is it possible as a human being, not as individual, to remain with sorrow and suffering and so on, totally without any moment, completely one with it? Then you see that there comes an extraordinary transformation with the ending of sorrow, suffering and so on. The realization of we are the world is passion. This passion is not lust. Passion is entirely different. If you have no passion, you are not you, if you have no passion, you are not existent. Without moving away from sorrow and suffering, a totally different moment, that moment is endless passion and such passion is compassion. धन्यवाद. कृष्णमूर्ती